early this year, I can say I grew into my name. I discovered that my name is actually inherently a very spiritual name. And it actually carries a lot of my work, the essence of the work that I do, the essence of the work that I want to do is actually captured in my birth name.
Thokozani everyone, and welcome to another great and exciting episode of Lesedi podcast. Of course, myself being the host with the most, Gogo Moyo, and I will be hosting you today. I spoke to someone that's really important in my life, I believe. Anyway, he is someone who carries a conversation around ubungoma, African belief systems, and just wanting to learn about culture. What is the importance? What is the need, therefore, of practicing? And what does it do for us? How does it translate in our lives? As modern children, we decide to, carve our own path. And as much as that may be liberating, we also leave some of the most important learnings and findings that we learn from our families. Some come through dreams, through our ancestors talking to us, and some are literally passed down from generation to generation. I'm speaking to someone who is from a city background, but he was born Islaline. But he had an urge, a curiosity about learning about African belief systems. I'm talking about the awesome Vusimuzi Ngxande. And this is someone who started talking to me in my practice on a professional level when I was probably 2-3 years into my game, into the industry of ubungoma, a young healer. Probably I was 21 then, and he heard my cry, he heard my voice, he heard and he saw me. I felt seen because I was a young person who entered the industry but didn't necessarily know how to navigate this part of my life. I wasn't typically born in an environment where I grew up in Bonizangoma around me, seeing healers around me. So I never really interacted with them. So by the time I entered the industry, I thought technology, social media, innovation, pioneering. And little did I know that it was going to help me meet one of the amazing people that I've ever met in my life. And this is him. This is Uvus. And this is what he had to say in our interview. Tune in. Before you do that and get carried away in all the detail and the level of consciousness and the drops and the gems, make sure that you subscribe and you hit the bell icon for notifications. Ungaputhelwa on our next videos with more exciting people. And if you feel that you want to recommend someone, please let me know. I'd love to speak to them. Thokozani. Nanguvus.
Thokozani Gogo.
Ninjani.
We're good. We are okay. A little frazzled with time, but we're good. Sesegolo ke bophelo.
Welcome to Lesedi podcast.
Oh wow! Thank you. I've kind of been waiting for it. I actually thought you were doing it. I think it was last year or something. I figured it was gonna come.
Thank you. I'm glad that our moves, as much as they can be readable, but they are right on time as well.
Yeah, no. It makes sense.
Full
name Vusimuzi Ngxande. And yeah, that's my full name. And I actually prefer my full name, strangely enough. But yeah.
And the handle on Instagram, just Vus. Do you not prefer that?
I don't. You know what? I actually changed my names, and I'm actually in the process of actually changing my name formally on my ID. Yeah.
Read now.
First, it's actually it's a simple correction on the spelling of my name.
Okay.
My name was captured incorrectly on my birth certificate. And that's the one part. And the second part, early this year, I can say I grew into my name. I discovered that my name is actually inherently a very spiritual name. And it actually carries a lot of my work, the essence of the work that I do, the essence of the work that I want to do is actually captured in my birth name. And yeah, my name Vusimuzi means there's a couple of ways of looking at it. Vusimuzi, it's all like a philosophy of reawakening. That's the sort of the deeper meaning of it. It's a philosophy of reawakening a people. That's basically my definition of my name. It's a reawakening of people. And when I looked at the work that I do and what it's intended to do and the future work that I'm going to be doing, I actually realized that my name was actually quite prophetic. So after that, then I actually started using, this is why I introduced myself with my full name. And it's not Vus anymore, it's Vusimuzi. So yeah. But I haven't yet made a big deal about it. But I am going to make a big deal about it. So I'm going to start correcting people.
So you know certainly that you make your voice heard. Tell me, Vusimuzi, where did you grow up? Like, how was your childhood?
I grew up Komhlaking. Mhlaking is about it's about 30 minutes outside Joburg and sort of in the south near Soweto. My childhood, I honestly think I had a relatively good childhood. I think I had a good childhood in that I was extremely fortunate enough to grow up with my mother and my father in the same home for basically my whole life. And, you know, the realities that we live in sort of say that that's a very rare occurrence. So I think I can say, and I can say we're middle class, you know. So I grew up with mostly my sister. I was a very, very quiet child. Nerdy. I was a nerd. And I grew up believing that I was gonna sort of take the academic route. But I was fortunate that I didn't take the academic route. I went and I studied graphic design. And it's something that Leona I didn't realize that it would sort of set the full foundation for my spiritual work, you know, and I say that because I hated how sort of my career progressed. You know, it was I couldn't work in the mainstream, even though I wanted with all of my being to work in it, but circumstances just weren't allowing. You know, I ended up having to work very far from that. And what that allowed me to do then, it forced me to sort of develop other skills other than designing. So then I got into writing. So I became a writer, and in different publications long ago. And also then I also learned photography, which I was terrible at. I failed photography. And in that, I also learned, and because I was so terrible at it, I had to keep at it. And then what actually happened was I realized that my photography only worked when I dealt with certain subjects. If I tried to do mainstream photography with models and all of it, didn't work. My photography only worked once I took documentary photography. When I started then just documenting life, then I sort of came into it as because then it suited my personality in that I'm generally a quiet person, and with documentary photography, it serves you well to actually be quiet, and you just learn to listen with your eyes, if I can put it that way. So, yeah.
When you talk about failing at photography, and then I look at your page, Thokoza Dlozi, I can see why they've been pushing you away from the mainstream, because that is amazing work that you've put there. You've captured really, really intense and highly powerful moments, especially in the fraternity of Ubungoma. How related are you to the spaces that you find yourself in terms of the way you grew up? Did you grow up in a household that perhaps was very big advocate of you to follow your roots? Marry that?
No, actually. Strangely enough, my spirituality is actually still a very contentious issue at home. I did not grow up with Kadilozi. You know? I didn't grow up with these with this understanding. It's something that came very late to me. And it wasn't something that I sought out. I didn't seek spirituality in a way as a path. I didn't seek out African spirituality. I didn't seek out Ubungoma. You know what I mean? In 2004, 2005, I became a born-again Christian when I was in university, right? Okay. And I was deep in it. I was deep in it. I was actually the part of the marketing team in our campus, you know. So I was very deep in it. But eventually I sort of came out of it because there were a lot of things that I couldn't reconcile with Christianity. And I think around 2006, 7, I just left Christianity in general. And I left the church. And in many ways, I won't say I stopped believing in God, but I took God and just put the concept aside. And I told myself, I don't want to believe in anything. I would like for this, whatever it is that exists, I want to get to know it organically. You know what I mean? I don't want to sort of seek out any specific thing, because if I knew that if I seek out any specific thing, what happens then is that I have to convince myself of a lot of things, you know. So I didn't grow up with it. What the only thing that happened was it was social media, and in 2010, 2011, the relationship that I was in ended, and I basically found myself in a space where I had to begin my life from scratch. I basically lost everything, right? I literally needed to start my life over again in a different city, in a different province, and everything. Because at the time I had been living in Cape Town for about 10 years. So what happened was I was starting to, I needed, the issue that I was facing around about that time was I was trying to reconcile my relationship with my father who had passed away at that time. And I couldn't do that because he wasn't there, and I wasn't really sure how. I basically wanted to get over my daddy issues, right? But I didn't know how exactly to do that. And around about, 2010, 2011, 2012, things like Facebook was still relatively new. You know what I mean? And then I came across this lady called Refule Irumo on Facebook, and she was a sangoma, you know, and it was like, how? Okay, this is different. I'm used to being home at the back of the room, you know, with the shady lighting and stuff, you know. And I'm like, yeah, she's also kind of cute. Okay. And I mean that because I was in that phase in my life, you know. And I'm like, let's go here, you know. I have these weird dreams and let's go here. No, Raboni. You know, at the very least, maybe you catch a date. I don't know. you'll see what happens. Only to find out she had a boyfriend. Yes. Oh. So that fell apart. But in talking to her, I've been talking to you. I just needed to give that background because it's important. And I always, whenever I talk about how me and you met, I always want to emphasize the underlying reasons, my dodgy underlying reasons in doing this. Because a lot of the time we talk about spirituality, it's like, oh, I was looking for this, I was looking for... No, I wasn't. I was just a normal guy. And the reason I need to point this out is that the path will find you regardless of what you believe your intentions are. You know what I mean? So I literally went in with ulterior motives. Totally. I didn't care about Padim, I didn't care about those things, but it captured me. Like it captured me, and you gave me a reading that literally took me in a different direction in my life, right? And you gave me a reading that took literally 8 years. We sat for an hour, and that hour I've been trying to decipher for the past 8 years. And when we had this conversation the last time, I was like, it was only in September that I fully understood, and it was also part of the reason why I ended up embracing my name, because I realized that I went, at the time I was trying to reconcile the issues that I had with my father, and only to find that even in a spiritual way, my relationship with my father was the guiding energy that sort of pushed me through, my path, and to the extent where I realized that I inherited certain gifts from him. I suppose we don't call it spiritual gifts, but I inherited gifts that I now use in my spiritual growth from him, So yeah, there was a long way around answer to a simple question. But yeah.
No, but that's beautiful. I like that you provided so much context, because you make someone be able to relate to you, because you're talking about things that we think, that we do, just to try to distract us from our problems. So please do you. Yeah. I think I want to go back to the part where you said that you were a deep Christian and you were part of a marketing team. To me, what that's saying now with what you're doing also with your career in terms of your spiritual career, I could say that you've always been a person who is motivated and determined to carry a message for people. So imagine you're in a deeply Christian environment. It's still, you found great servitude in still wanting to help and share their narratives. And I don't see it changing for you even to where you are. So it seems like you and storytelling are just one and the same, Yeah. So I think that's quite interesting also with how much of your name, which a name is a starting point, you get it the moment you get into the world. And for that mistake to have happened, and for you to spend your entire life wanting to make change and bring purpose to your name and really give it the respect that it deserves, you literally went also through the same metamorphosis in your life, the transition that you've made from you got lost. And that's part of where the era of your ways were. And it's not even an error because you were never supposed to be there, but it wasn't the one that would have served you, but you had to go for you to be able to see it. So that is something that I find very interesting. With what I'm going to is the name journey. That's a journey of a lifetime. People have many issues with identity. At least you knew what your surname was.
Okay, the podcast, how the Journey Kwantu came about was, the Journey Kwantu is actually an evolution of Thokozahlozi. It's an evolution of the photography, because I started the photography in 2014, for about 6 years, and what I was doing, I was documenting ancestral ceremonies, right? And I was traveling around the country, documenting it through photography. And what would happen is that, without fail, when I'm at these functions, because usually I'm sure they will take like a weekend, like a couple of days, I would inevitably always have very interesting conversations with people, right? Especially our elders, and a lot of the time these weren't questions of conversations about spirituality. These were just general conversations, about, and because we're in that ancestral, within the confines of an ancestral ceremony, then we would generally then talk about history. Right. And then they would give like perspectives on their understanding of things. And obviously then there would all constantly be that comparison, like, oh no, in our days it wasn't like that, it wasn't like this, these ceremonies were like that. And I would always, because I wanted, while I was taking photos, I always liked recording drums and songs. I always liked recording, but it was just for myself. I liked the songs and I would record them and just to keep them. It wasn't like any intended reason, I just liked them. And then I would actually record those conversations as well, right? So I actually have lots of recordings that I have with random baholo, about all sorts of things. And I when there came a time when I actually wanted to write a book about spirituality, right? So last year, from last year onwards and the year before, I started researching a lot on spirituality, on African spirituality in general, right? And I was learning a lot about spirituality, and I was also recording these conversations, right? Then I sort of came to a situation where I would actually like to share these conversations with people, these conversations that I'm having, and the research that I'm doing for this book that I want to write. And at some point I realized that this book is not going to happen. Like, I don't have the discipline in me to because I kept starting it. But what I wasn't writing, but I was researching a lot, and I got caught up in the research. I was loving the research that I was learning, you know what I mean? Then I'm like, how can I marry this information that I'm learning and these conversations that I'm having, right? Because I'm learning so much from this, about spirituality in general, because a lot of when it comes to African spirituality, the information that we get always seems to center around Ubungoma, whereas I wanted to learn so much more outside of that, and I was also realizing that with these trips that I was making around the country, it was almost like each time I was finding, a missing puzzle piece, like I would go Limpopo, Eastern Cape, like I would always come back with like, another piece to my puzzle that I thought was African spirituality, but I found out that it was actually me. I was finding different, puzzle pieces to myself, and my identity. So I was like, the first thought was I could do, and I spoke to some friends, and I could do some friends of mine wanted us to do a YouTube channel, and it kind of didn't work out for lots of reasons. People had things to do. And because I'm such a visual person, I was like, if I can't afford to do it the way I feel I should do it, if I'm going to do something visual, it has to be epic. You know what I mean? I want drone shots, I want cinematography, I want all of these things. And I actually can't afford that. So then I challenged myself in, can I create that cinematic feel with sound?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Okay.
And that's a creative challenge for myself. It wasn't, I want to do a podcast. I wanted to challenge myself because I wanted to grow creatively in a different way. And I'd been experimenting with sound design on different projects, whenever I would do like a video project, I would always be very interested in the sound design, and I suppose I can say I wanted to study sound design. Like, how do you create an atmosphere? How do you sort of take people somewhere with just sound? And so it was the conversations I was having, the research, and the personal challenge are like, then I can actually make a podcast, but it can't just be a podcast. I want it to be like a journey. Like I want you to feel like I took you with me when I went to this place, and this person told me about this thing, and you know what I mean? So that's literally how the podcast came about.
That sounds amazing. And I'm glad that you also were able to answer your own questions by just going on a quest, to marry the two worlds that you were in. And that's so beautiful, because people ask all the time, how do you do something for so long? Like, how are you so consistent? I'm like, the only way that can happen is if you are actually getting something from it as well, on a personal level, and not even whether it's financial or kitumo, but is it growing of your spirit? And to me, it sounds like Journey did exactly that for you. Was actually a question I wanted to ask you about. What did I want to ask? You were talking about it just now. Hang on, give me a sec.
It will come. You see, I have these issues. This is part of the reason why I wanted to do a podcast. I'm like, I can't do a live because I talk too much and I need to edit that stuff. And I'm like, I'm not such a good talker. So for it to come out right, I would need a lot of editing. So I'm like, okay, if I take out the visual part, then I have less things to have to worry about.
That is very true. And on that note, I've remembered what I wanted to ask you. And I wanted to know, out of the 12 episodes that you've done on the Journey Kwantu, firstly, who was the most favorite conversation that you had? And also, from the conversations that you've had in these episodes, which do you think was your most listened to, most viewed, something that you realized that it was a common conversation for a lot of people and they really drew a sense from it?
Yeah. You see, this is now, you're asking, this sounds like a question about my approach to things, but then what I've learned about the podcast and people listening to things and whatever is that how you name an episode is actually very crucial, right?
Of course.
It's and I didn't know this, right? Funny enough, when I started, my episodes were going to be named after like poems. They were going to be named after movies, scenes, and they're going to be extremely abstract. You know what I mean? Because it's just me. This is what I like, and what I realized is that when the most listened to podcast was The Secret Life of Surnames. And I think it was because it was almost a more direct, it said what the thing was about. Whereas, when I was talking about Abu Mama Mtandazo and spirituality, people wanted to know the content before they got into it. And I think that particular episode, it got a lot of listens because I think first the title went to the content directly. But I also think that it is a conversation that a lot of people are having. So I just want to the reason I'm saying this is because I realize that there's a correlation with numbers actually come down to a lot of things. If an episode doesn't get a lot of numbers, it's not actually, there's a lot of reasons why that happens. And sometimes it would be the length, it would be this, but so there are those technical things. And the most challenging episode, the most challenging episode was episode 3 that dealt with Abu Mama Bomtandazo, in that it was the first time I realized that the podcast was a spiritual project. I know that it was spiritual inherently because I was asking spiritual questions, but it was the first time I realized my guides were invested in it, and they were invested in certain topics, and they were invested in me learning very specific things. As much as I was trying to share information, there's some information that they wanted me to know, right? In several ways, in that it was during that time then my paternal grandmother started appearing in my dreams, right? And this was the very first time. To the extent where, because what the episode was about, it was trying to put into context what role Black women had in having to balance colonization, which was represented by Christianity, and their African identity represented by African spirituality, and how what Abo Mama Bomtandas, what we thought was an evil thing that they did to African spirituality to subvert it, was actually something that they did for the survival of Black people.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And and how a story that I can share about what happened was I had a particular dream where my grandmother was saying that, because she was also Mama Bomtanda, she was telling me that the narrative about her in the family was wrong, right? Because we grew up with these stories about my grandmother being this type of person and this type of person. And she sort of, when I was doing the research around the project, she sort of came to me in a dream and said that what people are saying about me is actually not correct. And she literally showed me where to go at home to find this bunch of letters from 1928, 1930, which were interactions between her and family members, where I could literally hear from her. This is what happened on this date. This is what happened in 1935. This is what happened. This is why this happened, and this happened, and this happened. And this is why when your father was born, this is what happened, and this is what happened. And this is why your father thought this and this happened, and that happened. And it was sort of revealed to me literally the lineage of how in our family, African spirituality got to be subverted. You see, and it literally came as I was busy with that episode and afterwards. And this is why I'm saying it was then that I realized that, okay, I'm not doing this alone. And they want certain, you know, when I was saying you have a team, you have a producer, I realized that they were producing the podcast. You know, they said, okay, I said episode 4 is going to be this. Like, no, that's not episode 4. This is what's going to be on episode, you know what I mean? Because the second part where I realized like my people were heavily invested in this podcast was the episode about how we lost the Black man, right? Which is essentially about our state, the state of Black men in this era that we're in. It took me 4 months to do that episode. Each time I kept trying to do it, it wouldn't work. I tried to get Gogo Aubrey for months, you know, and we couldn't agree on dates and this. And then when we finally got to talking, because a friend of mine, because it was locked down, and I'm like, I don't want to do Zoom. I want to sit with a person, you know what I mean? They're like, Baba, things have changed. You know, you have to do it digital. And I'm like, something in me doesn't feel right. You know what I mean? But I succumbed, and me and Gogo, we did a Zoom thing. And then afterwards, the thing didn't record. I'm like, okay. I just said for a whole hour, this thing didn't work. Go. You know what I mean? But then it was lockdown, right? And then what lockdown then did was it forced all of us to sit and just be quiet and sit with yourself. And I wanted to tackle the issue of how broken Black men are, right? I wanted to ask these questions. I wanted to ask the history. But what I hadn't done, I hadn't asked myself those questions, right?
Sure.
And I hadn't asked those questions in my lineage. I hadn't asked these questions about the men in my life. My father, my grandfather, my great-grandfather. You know what I mean? And it was through the lockdown that, because I was bored, I needed to do something with my hands. You know, I got tired of TV, I got tired of Netflix. I started working with my hand, and then I started getting dreams on what to do when I was working with my hands, right? And that's how those spears came about that everybody liked a lot. And it was literally the first time I was working with my hands. And it was literally felt like I would wake up and then this information was sort of downloaded. You know what I mean? I knew like, okay, I had to do this and this. But eventually it was sort of revealed to me that that was a skill my father had. His gift was making things with his hands. But because Black men grew up the way that they grew up, the majority of Black men don't know what their gift is. You know what I mean? And I learned I can say it was sort of revealed to me what my father's actual ancestral gift actually is, and that I had inherited it. And I then had to learn how to develop it. And and you wouldn't think that your ancestors would guide you to YouTube, but they guide you to YouTube. You think they guide you to Kobela? No, they will take you to a YouTube channel, and there's you know what I mean. And I found this old Japanese man there who was a craftsman, and they didn't even have translations. You just watch, and I'm like, oh, and so this Japanese Mkulu became my Mkulu, and I'm learning, and he's not saying anything to me. And it was only when I embraced that aspect of myself, then I could do the episode, because I realized that the issue that they had was I was approaching the topic of black men very pessimistically. I was approaching it, we are broken, why are we so useless? And I had to learn, like, as challenged as we are, black men actually carry spiritual gifts in them. And we inherit those gifts generationally.
My question for you is, during podcasting, during making sure that your name is spelled right and it represents who you are, to the photography and what it did with sending you across South Africa to make you literally step into people's environments and literally take in that air from a personal perspective, not even trying to zoom our way through life, but you literally ukhatile mabala at all these places. What is the biggest lesson that stays with you?
I was actually thinking about this last night, because I'm sort of busy with my next project, the next evolution.
Yes, looking forward.
Yeah, and I was like, I sort of struggle to say this, but it's actually true in that your pace is very, very important, right? And I had to learn that you are moving at the pace that you need to be moving at. And the reason I was thinking about this, because I'm sort of very scared of the next chapter. I'm like, how am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? How am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? And I then had to look at all of these other projects, these other chapters of my life, and say, Thokoza Dlozi took me to Eastern Cape for a week and I had 200 Rand in my pocket. You know what I mean? Like, because I was like, how am I going to do this? And even with the podcast, I don't know, I've never had a podcast, I don't know how to do this, I don't know how to do that. Only then I had to sort of remind myself that your pace is a part of your teaching. You know what I mean? Part of the lesson that you have to learn each and every day is that your pace is part of your lesson. It is not. It's not a thing that you have to do. It is your pace is like, I don't know, man. It is a chapter in your book. It's not a discipline thing, but it's an actual lesson. Because I had to learn that everything that happened at the right time. Everything that happened at the time that it needed to happen in. Me meeting you happened in that, even though, like I was saying, I had my own thinking about what should happen and whatever. And trusting yourself is so important, even when you don't feel that you are doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Because the challenge is that we're trying to follow, when and a big part of all the challenges we're facing is because we're trying to follow, and I think this is one of the things that I feel you have taught me, and I keep learning from you, in that you found your lane, but the thinking is that you only have one lane. You only have one way of doing, you know what I mean? Whereas your lane has lanes in it.
Yes.
It's not like one thing where you are one person who does one thing. you have a whole highway, which is your lane, and that highway has lanes in it. And I think my biggest lesson that I learned for myself is that stay away from titles.
Yes, please.
Stay away from titles. Stay away from being boxed in. Because had I said I'm a photographer and this is all that I'm doing, I would have never done a podcast. If I had said that I'm a graphic designer and this is all I'm doing, I would have never done the photography. You know what I mean? And if I had said all of these things and this is all I can do, I wouldn't have been able to do the thing that I have to do next, you know, which is working with my hands. You know what I mean? And that for me has been the key that opened literally all the doors where, you know, we wanted title, we wanted this, and especially when it comes to African spirituality, with the whole fixation on ubungoma, you know, because I get asked a lot, like, so Oyisangoma, you know, utwasile, and I'm like, I'm not a sangoma, I'm twasi, and I struggle to explain what it is, because people are like, so what are you? I'm like, I'm just me. You know what I mean? I'm really just me, but in being me, it means a lot. Me being me actually translates into a lot of different things, you know. And I was like, there are a lot of titles that I think have died that we need to bring back. And there are also a lot of titles that haven't been invented yet. You know, there are a lot of there's a wide spectrum of how we can function within African spirituality. And I think it is imperative if everyone functions within their gifts, you know, then we won't have a fixation of, you know, I need to find a Kobela, I need to find this, because you might not need to find a Kobela. I need to find an old man who lives in a forest somewhere. That's who I'm looking for. You know what I mean? I need to go, the information that I need won't necessarily be found in Vumbi. You know what I mean?
Yes.
It's going to be found somewhere else. It won't be, you know, and this is what I've learned and sort of embraced, that someone told me a very important, something that sort of guides me a lot. And they said, you're going to have many teachers. So let go of your fixation on Ukoko Banban or Umkulu Banban. Learn what you need to learn from them. And don't get personally invested in them. You know, these are your teachers. You don't go to high school and then want to visit your teacher after school and say, hey, so teacher, so what are we doing on the weekend? So who's your boyfriend, ma'am? So you know what I mean? Like, go to your teachers, learn from your teachers, and leave them alone. You know what I mean? If you go on YouTube, go to Gogo, learn what you need to learn and leave her alone. You know what I mean? Go to whoever, learn what you can learn and leave them alone. Don't say, but you know, I never liked her when doing this and this and this. I never liked, you know what I mean? Like, don't get, we get too caught up in that stuff. And I think it is part of why we are not progressing as we should be, because we're just fixated on the personalities of people.
Sure, you said that so beautifully. You know, my takeaway from what you're saying is speaking about the titles that we should let go of, because we are trasana. But the one thing that people don't realize about Utrasa is that it's infinite. You know, we are trasa all the time for a certain amount of period, for a certain time frame, to learn whatever the lesson is in that space. And then it happens elsewhere, and then elsewhere. So all the way up until you rest. So it's funny that they would want for you to say that, or give yourself a title of a name that they inevitably don't understand the reach or how far it goes. So yes, that's the boxing that you're talking about. Yeah,
and I reflect on these different chapters that I've gone through, where when I look back at it and I see the specific lessons, like when I was doing the photography, you know, I was sort of being taught to keep quiet and just listen. You know what I mean? Just keep quiet and observe. And I literally had to do that for 6 keep quiet. You know, don't try to understand, don't try to package, just listen. Go to you know, Northwest, go to Limpopo, just go and listen and just listen. Keep quiet. There's nothing for you to achieve. You don't have to come out there knowing this. Just listen. And with the podcast, they were like, when you were listening, you had questions. now you're going to spend this time asking, you know what I mean? And for me, these were how I can say my guides are teaching me. You know, I don't want to say that's how because it has connotations to it, but this is how I am growing, and they're using my skills to teach me. They're using my natural gift to lead me to people. And because you got fixated on I need a kobela. Nah, you just actually need some random guy in a taxi who's gonna sit down with you and tell you this. You're gonna sit with them for an hour, and you're gonna, you know what I mean? That's what you need. You don't need, and then afterwards, the other month, you're gonna need some other who's gonna send you to wherever. You know what I mean? We want our lessons packaged like this. Yeah. Whereas the lessons are, they're literally infinite. And I think that's the one thing that I can say I have learned, and I am grateful for.
When you're talking about packaged, you're reminding me of this group of this generation rather of Amatwasa, who inevitably are now starting to ask for manuals. So that's just how far everything has evolved to a point where you dump down your own intelligence, your own intuition, and you want to be fed everything. So thank you so much, Vus, for joining us today. This is how we are feeding the masses who are watching this podcast, and I sincerely appreciate you. I love that I've got such a beautiful soul part of that's linked to also my story, and there was a way that I was able to influence your journey and how you began. So keep flourishing, keep shining, and thank you so much for the journey, Kwantu. I also learned a lot. Thank you for also featuring me there. It shows that in this life thing, there's always a constant flow of energy. Don't be the one that stops the ball from rolling. Just go with it, because it comes full circle either way. So I'd like to thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate. Thank you very much. I appreciate it, and I appreciate your guidance and everything, and I appreciate all the conversations we've had. There haven't been that many, because I think people will think they hang out together. No, it's not like that. Even if it's a 15-minute conversation, I appreciate that, and all the best to you and the new projects. It's looking nice.
Thank you so much, and I also am looking forward to seeing what you're working on, and hopefully we'll also get to hear those conversations that you've recorded but haven't done anything with them. Put us on. We also want to know what it is that's rich out there that we also haven't yet experienced.
In good time.
Oh, certainly, take your time. We wanted Vusimuzi's way, not just because we want it.
Thank you.
So,
thank you so much.
Wow. What a conversation. I feel like it's so nice to talk to people, because you get to hear the different perspectives. You get to see what they have to share, what they know, what they are, what governs their life, what is their moral compass, and what builds up their value systems. And from this interview, I can tell you that there's a lot to think about. There's a lot to reflect on. And you realize that actually I'm not so much in isolation after all, because clearly there are other people who are going through similar things, having similar conversations in their minds, and needing the conversations to happen. Thank you so much for being my guest this evening. Please leave your comment in the comment section below. Let me know what you thought of the conversation. Let me know what struck you the most. Let me know what else you want to hear about, or who you want to hear from. And I'll be happy to host you once again. And this is me, Moyo. Moyo.